I'm Edgar Garcia. I'm faculty in the Department of English and Creative Writing, and I teach in our course sequence, Poetry and the Human, with my colleagues.
I'm Ben Saltzman. I'm a professor in the English department.
I'm Patrick Morrissey. I teach Poetry and the Human all the time.
I'm Andy Broughton. I teach Poetry and the Human all the time.
I'm Sarah Neuter. I'm in Classics and Theater and Performance Studies, and I'm the chair of PATH.
I'm Naama Rokem, and I'm a faculty member in Middle Eastern Studies and in the Department of Comparative Literature, and my specialty is modern Jewish literature in Hebrew and in German.
I think one of the things that is really sort of guiding question for me in Poetry and the Human is, or two guiding questions. One is like, what does poetry do, and what do we do with poems? And one of the things that's, I think, really cool is that across the arc of the course, we do a lot of different things with poems, right? So, and we see lots of different ways that poems sort of behave in the classroom and out in the world. And so, you know, in the fall and winter, in the sort of the Hume Core, the first two cores of the Hume Core, we're studying poems and learning to discuss them and read them closely together and write about them and imitating them. And then come the spring, we take poems out into the hospital, say in the Poetry in Public course, or we imitate them a lot and study poems as ways to generate new poems in a Path Arts creative writing sequence. So maybe we can each talk a little bit about the different ways we approach the different things we do with poems in the classrooms at different times of the year. I don't know, Ben, if you wanted to start.
Yeah, sure. So I usually teach in the fall quarter, and I have to say, like, teaching in Poetry and the Human is absolutely my favorite teaching experience. It's my favorite course to teach. You too. I think a lot of us feel that way. And for me, it's because I never know what's going to happen when I walk into the classroom, right? I always show up ready to learn from the group of students who have been assembled there, ready to talk about sometimes even just one poem for an hour and a half, which sounds insane. But by the end of, I'm always surprised how by the end of class, we've wound up in a place that I never could have expected or I never could have come to on my own. And it emerges from the kind of magic of the conversation, the magic that takes place when one student makes an observation and then another picks up on it, and we kind of pull the threads together and wind up someplace new. And I just love that.
Right. I'd add to that, it's collaborative, right? And so we're all building off of each other's comments and adding to them and modifying them. And that sort of constant interchange is one of the things that makes Path kind of distinct to me, because it happens every day. It's not, you know, once a week or once every 2 weeks. It's every class. I can say a little bit about the spring quarter. So I teach fall, winter, and spring. And so I teach in the spring a Poetry in Public class. And in that class, just going back to Professor Morrissey's point, we take poetry into a specific clinical setting, which is at Comer Hospital. And so I teach students to tutor patients in an oncology program to write poetry over the course of the quarter. And so after a short teaching practicum, they volunteer for, I believe, 7 or 8 weeks.
Can I add something general about what the courses do, that PATH is doing in general, which is to show students how poetry is a way of going out into the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when Andy is sending students to the hospital, we're thinking about how poetry can be of service. And when students are writing their own poems, they're thinking about how they, in a sense, can turn their experience into art. But we also have an all PATH poetry reading and open mic every single year for our present and past students, because we're a community. We try to visit the Smart Museum as well. We think about art. We come here to special collections every single year and think about the materials and the history of the poetry that we're reading. We have wonderful poets come and visit. We had the poet laureate this year, Arthur C. And we've had many wonderful poets, Joy Harjo, Terrence Hayes. We have discussions together outside of class. We ask all of our students to make a video in which they go out into Chicago or elsewhere and talk to people about what poetry means to them. So we're really trying to show how poetry is not just something you do with a book, although it's that too. It's something that actually can inform so many different walks of life.
I like to say that it like our students come out of this class learning how to see the world in new ways, right? Learning how to observe differently, learning how to defamiliarize their own relation to others and to the world around them.
Yeah, I think when we started out and we were thinking about what we wanted to build, we were asking ourselves, why does every culture that we have on record seem to have some version of poetry, right? Poetry doesn't feed you, it doesn't put a roof over your head, and yet it seems to be somehow really intrinsic to our experience of being human in the world. And I remember, Nama, you asked something like, can we make this gambit work? That poetry is a sufficient lens to see the humanities, to understand our humanness, and we found that we could. And so we do ancient poetry, we do Homer, Sappho, Catullus, but we think about many different ways of experience. We think about death and mourning, we think about love, we think about language, we think of small, and then we also think big. In the winter quarter, we tell a somewhat coherent story that brings us through many of the catastrophes of the 20th century into the present moment. And we try to suggest to our students that poetry gives them the tools for being in the world, for responding to the world around them, for being an activist if they want to be an activist, for being a scholar if they want to be a scholar, for expressing what it is like to move through reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should mention that Poetry and the Human is the most recent addition to the humanities core. And so we've all, those of us sitting here and other colleagues who teach in the sequence, have played a really instrumental role in forming the syllabus, and we keep kind of working on it and refining it. And I think, to me, one of the reasons it's such a, for many people, like the favorite thing we do on campus, I hear that often from colleagues, is that it grows out of a real intellectual community here, the community of scholars and practitioners who write about poetry, about translation, who write poetry and teach creative writing. And the course is really formed by our interests, the things that we're passionate about, and our conversations with each other, right? The way that we meet across different time periods, different languages, different modes, different kinds of questions about poetry, but the syllabus really was formed through a conversation about these different things. And so I think it's that, in some sense, tension between a sort of basic sensibility that poetry is a universal human phenomenon, and that we study it within its different contexts and kind of create the syllabus. Really, in some ways, you can think of it as an anthology of world poetry that we have assembled for the students, and that in itself is really meaningful creative work. Sort of think about how these different traditions, different moments in history, different languages speak to each other and create meaning. And so the conversations that the students have with each other also grows out of the conversation between the different texts. And I think that's a really meaningful part of the sort of the community that we've created.
What is most powerful to me about the scope of our reading is that we go from the Iliad to the Popol Vuh, Greek classical antiquity to indigenous literature, and Scott Momaday to William Carlos Williams, Gwendolyn Brooks. We read across so many apparently dividing lines, and we break those lines down through this spectrum that we call poetry, but that actually doesn't encompass what it is that we study.
I think listening to you guys talk about it, something else I think is worth emphasizing is that, when we think about the humanities core, it can sound like this kind of like ponderous set of texts that are kind of like our cultural inheritance or something like that. It's kind of dead, like history is done and we just have to like download it, right? But one of the things that we're always experiencing in PATH is that this both universal but also highly variegated and different, all these different kinds of poetry, it's a set of living resources, right? The tradition is alive, right? And always changing. And our students are always changing it when they encounter these texts and reconfigure them and see new connections between them and memorize poems or take them out into the hospital. It's like a constant engagement with the past and the things that people have said and made in the past, but by making them new, right? By literally sometimes breathing new life into them.
I think that in that sense also, it's so special that we can through the medium of poetry really spans sort of the ancient. We also read the Hebrew Bible as part of our unit of love poetry and erotic poetry, but that we always invariably include quite a bit of the contemporary, right? And so, as Sarah said, we have visiting poets, and we're updating the syllabus to kind of include things that also just feel relevant from contemporary poetry as the world changes around us, and sort of things happen, and our sense of what is relevant to students. And so that span is really sort of fundamental to precisely that element, that this is a living form, a relevant sort of transforming, evolving art form that we live with.
Because there may be a misconception that this is a class only for poets. And it's definitely not. This is a class for everyone, insofar as everyone should know poetry, insofar as everyone should at least try in some way to cultivate a poetic spirit. And the works on the table, everything that we teach represents that.
And I would say, especially students who don't think that they're poets, right?
Yeah.
Students who are here to do economics or computer science. This
Or
is
become doctors.
this is where you get those resources, and you're going to have them for the rest of your life. And
Right.
you know, there will be times when you'll need them, when you'll be grieving, when you'll
Right.
be in love,
Right.
when you'll want to be able to put into words the experience you're having, all apart from the work that you do. And we are really happy to be there for that, conversation.
Yeah, I have to say to my students, I just want you to know at the end, like, poetry is there for you.
Yeah.
Whether you're there for poetry is up to you, but poetry is there for you. It's always waiting for you if you want.
Yeah.